I hate to break it to you, my friends, but stocks are not safer for the long term. I know. That's crazy man talk, because we've all been told the longer you can hold stocks, the safer they become. That's not true, and I'm going to share it with you here today. I know it's sad, it's scary, right? You're like, what? This guy's gone crazy. But listen, I'm telling you. There's an old CCR song, Someday Never Comes. You ever heard that? Someday you'll understand. That's literally, that is incredible good singing on my part. And it goes, someday never comes. Because as a little kid, apparently, I think his dad left him. And he said, where's dad? And the dad's like, someday you'll understand. And the kid says later on, but I never did understand. And someday never comes. Well, the same thing could be here with the stock market. When we say the long-term stocks are safer, the long-term never comes. The long-term never comes. Let me tell you what I'm talking about here. All right, so basically we start with $100,000 in the market, and we wait 10 years, and it gets us $200,000 10 years later. So that's a 7.2% return, right? Annual. Start with 100. Doubles the money in 10 years, that's 7.2. And that's simply the rule of 72. So we divide 72 by our interest rate, and it gets the number of years to double. That's what the rule of 72 is, by the way. So you take 72, the number 72, divide by the interest rate you're getting, and that'll show you how many years it takes to double. Or you can divide by how long it took to double. It took 10 years to double. Now I'll give you 7.2 as the interest rate. I hope that makes sense. So that's the rule of 72. All right, so inherently that makes sense, right? Man, if I could just hold for 10 years and I get 7.2% a year, I'll make money. And I'll double my money. And you're like, yeah, that's great. So you say, I don't care if the market does like this as long as it ends like that. But here's the problem. This is what everyone overlooks. That's great. But the problem is when you get, let me just make sure that's dry enough. Hold on just a second. Is when you're here, so you take $100,000, and it goes up and down, and now you're at 135. What's the long term? Well, the long term is 10 years from here. You see what I'm saying? So what happens now is that 135 drops to 110. Are you sitting there thinking, oh man, I can just hold for the long term and I'll be fine? But the long term is based on, when you initially did it, based on this right here. But the long term never comes because the market goes like this. So does that make sense? So let's just say it goes to 80. You're like, man, if I can just hold for the long term, I'll be okay. But the long term goes like this. The long term never comes. You're always in the short term. And this is what I think people miss all the time about investing. Yeah, I can tell you 10 years from now you should be okay. But 1 year from now, I'm going to tell you 10 years from now you should be okay. 2 years from now, I'm going to tell you 10 years you should be okay. 3 years from now, I'm going to tell you 10 years you should be okay. You're never there. You're never there. You're always worried about today. And so let me show you another example, because I tell you, when I can't remember who I read it. Maybe it's Nassim Taleb. Oh, man. Or who was the guy? Some physicist, I think, actually. He's writing about the markets. And he says, I forgot who it was. Was it Benoit Mandelbrot, I think. Maybe it's Benoit. He's a mathematician. Benoit Mandelbrot. I think he was the one who kind of recognized the long-term silliness of it. And I think Nassim talked about it. Nassim Nicholas Taleb. All right, so let me tell you what I'm talking about here. So you got, we'll just say $100,000, and you're like, man, I'm doing great. Now I'm at retirement. I got $300,000. You're like, I was able to withhold all that, so I'm good to go. So all I got to do now is take my $300,000, because I was able to ride out the ups and downs of the market. I got my $300,000, and all I got to do is ride it out. And 5, 10, 15 years, I'll have $600,000. All right. But I mean, again, you just retired here. And you're like, okay, I can hang in there for 10 years, but what if the market crunches to 200,000? That's a 33% decline roughly. And you're like, yeah, that's okay, because the long term I'll be fine, because we don't have a history of 10 years of losing the significant amount of money. So I should be able to hang in there for the long term. I should be able to go from 300 to 200 to 600,000, because don't forget, on average after 10 years we average 7.2% a year. Well, that also includes a 33% decline. So now it's not a 7.2% a year for 9 years. Now, I don't even know what that is. I mean, that's got to go by, we got to trip our money in 9 years. I don't have my calculator there. But anyway, either way, it's not 7.2%. Now I got to get, well, actually, let's tell you what. Let's take our trusty old calculator here and see what that rate of return would be, shall we? So we got one payment a year. So we start with 200,000 is our present value, 9 years, and we got 600,000 future value. Not making any payments. Oops, 200,000. So that's a 12.98, a 13% rate of return. 13%. So before it's 7.2 to go from 300 to 600. Now it's 13% to go from 200 to 600, because it's only 9 years left, and we're already starting 33% of the way down. Does that make sense? So people say, man, just got to hold it for the long term and you'll be okay. You know, the long term on average, 7.2% over 10 years, that's no big deal. You should be fine. The first you get walloped. You're like, just hold it for the long term. That's hard, man. It's hard. You're down 33% of your portfolio. You're like, all I needed was 7.2% from here. Well, guess what? You're not here anymore. Those days are gone. Now you need 13% over the next 9 years to get to 600,000. The long term never comes. It never comes. I cannot stress this enough. So people sit there and say, hey, I should be fine because the long term I average X, Y, Z. Over 10 years, I don't lose money historically. In fact, I make pretty good money historically. I know, but in the reality, the long term consists of all this stuff right here. And the same method applies. 10 years, all right, 10 years, average 7.2%. That's not a big deal. That should be easily accommodated. But the first year out, I get walloped, because this is the short term. That's the long term. The short term is all that matters. I get walloped, right? Which happens all the time. Now I need 13% a year over the next 9 years to get to $600,000. And you're like, that doesn't seem as reasonable. Exactly. So now, if I go to 10 years, I'll have $400,000 at 7.2%. You see where I'm getting at? So now I'm saying, look, I got hit. I was expecting to get $600,000 with a 7.2% rate of return over the next 10 years. The first year is down 333%. I still could get 7.2% on average to get a $600,000. That's fine. But from here to there, I got to get 13%. So what do I need now in 10 years if I only got 7.2%? What will I have there? I only have $400,000. It's a big deal. It's a big change. Because the long term never comes. Just like John Fogerty told us. Someday never comes. You're always in the short term, and the short term always has these risks. Don't follow the facade of the long term, you'll be fine. Look, does that mean don't invest in stocks? No. But recognize that all that stuff in theory you hear makes sense on a spreadsheet. But in reality, you're sitting there saying, I am down 200,000, down to 200,000 bucks. That long term starts to look pretty far-fetched. As Keynes said, in the long run, we're all dead. Does that make sense? Because he said, what did he say? The markets can be irrational longer than you can be solvent. I don't know if that's Keynes who said that, but it's true. The markets can be irrational longer than you can be solvent. So just remember that. The long term never comes. And if you want a good song, sad actually, but listen to CCR, Someday Never Comes. We'll see you next time.